It's a very slow little. Okay, make sure we all get set here. And then. All right. We are live. I'm Colleen Phelps with Classically Speaking. Thanks for joining us this morning for a look at the future of the orchestra. I'm joined by some conductors who are forward-thinking, well-informed, and oh yeah, super talented. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Let's start with Jerry Johnson.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Not sure where all your listeners may be. Colleen, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Jerry Lynn Johnson. I'm the founder and artistic director for Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. It's a group I started in 2008 to address diversity and inclusion in classical music.
Mayanne?
Hello, Colleen. Thank you so much for including me. I'm actually streaming in from Taiwan. What you see in the background is my hometown, Wei Wuing, the largest arts complex. I am the music director of the Chicago Sinfonietta, the most diverse orchestra in North America. I'm also a principal guest conductor with the Austrian Orchestra in Graz and also with River Oaks Chamber Orchestra. And I'm summer festival director with the National Taiwan Symphony Orchestra.
Classically Speaking listeners have recently met Joanne Falletta, but Joanne, go ahead and introduce yourself here too.
Hi, Colleen. Thank you for inviting me, and hello to my colleagues and friends, Jerry and Mayanne. I'm the music director. I'm streaming from Buffalo. I'm the music director of the Buffalo Philharmonic and just recently became music director laureate of the Virginia Symphony after a very happy and long tenure there.
We've seen so many digital performances and new recordings being made by orchestral musicians during this time. But conducting is an art form that's about collaboration and connection. So this is really a unique situation. How have you spent the last 5 months? Jerry, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, well, I'm sure with all of my colleagues, it's been a difficult time, both from an artistic standpoint and also as an administrative standpoint. We're all leaders of our organizations and there's many hats that we wear and many considerations to take. And so for me, artistically, I had a lot of guest conducting that I was going to be doing as well. And so I think a lot of us have had dates canceled or rescheduled. So that'll be a familiar strain, I think, from all of our answers. For my organization, I felt that it was very important that I not force my musicians to choose between their lives and their livelihoods. And so I spent a lot of time raising a lot of money. We were blessed to get an NEA CARES Act grant and a number of other grants to float us through this time. And so I've been able to use that creatively for my musicians, for them to design their own projects moving forward, to be able to stream those online and for me to support their work that way. And so that was kind of the way that we've been mitigating this, is just really making sure that our musicians stay safe and that they stay engaged in ways that are meaningful to them.
Joanne, how about you?
Well, similar. I mean, it's been a very, very unusual 5 months, but we've done a lot virtually. And we did one of the most fun things we did was we all played together at home, the finale of The Firebird. And that was a great deal of fun. And we somehow tied it all together. But we have kept our musicians employed. They are going to be employed for the whole season. And I'm very proud of our board for that, for making that commitment to them. And we've been planning our season, which is starting in September. It's going to be streamed concerts at first until we can open our hall. But for me, myself, I've been practicing guitar again, which has been fun. I've been relearning Spanish, which I've loved, and bike riding, and doing a lot of research into composers that I used to know very well, but have forgotten, especially Black women composers and younger women composers that I have not known, and that's been a new world for me. So I've been really enjoying that.
Mayanne, how about you?
It's wonderful to hear what my colleagues have been doing, and similarly, I was able to find time to read Toni Morrison's books. I've wanted to just just to read books. And what a better time than now to actually stay put in one place. I think my colleagues will agree. Being a conductor in this day and age, one of the luxuries is staying put longer than a couple weeks at a time. And so it's been both challenging and rewarding. And challenging meaning, we have to think outside the box in terms of how to engage our musicians. And similarly, our musicians have recorded something from their home, and they're very creative in terms of chiming in what they can do for that particular virtual performances. But at the same time, there's some surprising outcome. For example, one of our musicians was tapped for shampoo commercials after seeing our ping pong plucked. This wonderful percussionist was waiting around combing her hair, and she got plucked for the shampoo thing. And one of our other percussionists got tapped for something else locally. One of our own violinists has such editing skill that other orchestras are contacting him to do something similar. And now we have engaged him full time, more of a full time staff to be doing a lot of the digital work that will be pretty much part of the new season. And so another thing I want to mention that's probably different from my colleagues, I'm in Taiwan because concert life in Taiwan has resumed, including symphonic performances. So I just did 5 performances, including 3 symphonic work in the hall you see behind me, with full audiences, which is just amazing after being locked out for like 4 months. So it gives me hope that that concert will resume the rest of the world.
Man, I did want you to talk a little bit about that feeling. Does the orchestra have a sort of renewed excitement being back right now?
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot believe just how alive all of us felt all of a sudden. Yes, you can do things from home, but that connection of being on stage, and we were doing Firebird, Sorcerer's Apprentice. It was just amazing to hear that collective big sound on stage again, and sharing that with the audience. I think we all miss that live music making, which is irreplaceable, if I could say that, from all of us trying to do something at home together.
We long for that return here in the USA, and some orchestras have announced, like it sounds like Buffalo, plans that split the difference between live and virtual, plus safe distances and flexibility for more to happen in the spring. What is something that you would suggest orchestras and conductors keep in mind as these plans are still getting formed? Joanne, you're right in the heart of it.
Well, first and foremost, the musicians must be safe and they have to feel safe. So we have to establish a comfort zone where they can play again. And I know we started off last month with some small orchestra of 12 people playing Bach and Telemann. Uh, it was very emotional, I have to say, Colleen. I mean, I think I was crying, and I think some other people were crying. We hadn't seen each other for months. We used to play together every week together, and um, it was very meaningful. Even though we were distanced, even though we were wearing masks, it still meant so much to us. So I think we have to find that way of making them feel comfortable. And then even if it's streamed, we can communicate that comfort and that joy and that very special feeling of being together to the audience. So we chose interesting repertoire. I mean, that's one of our strategies for going forward. Um, not We gave up on our original season, which, and on the Mahler 2 and the Berlioz Symphony Fantastique, we gave up on that for the year. But instead, we're celebrating pieces that we would not normally do, like Dumbarton-Oaks Stravinsky or Dvorak Wind Serenade, or a small string section playing lyric by George Walker, or Piazzolla Four Seasons. So it's actually been quite exciting to do repertoire that some of us haven't done for a long time, if ever.
Jerry, what would you offer people keep in mind?
You know, the same thing. I mean, so much of what an orchestra about is this shared musical experience of, you know, the magic of these instruments that are manifesting spirit through flesh. And I think even though, you know, I see these performances that people are streaming from their homes, or these kind of composite things that people put together through technology. Technology cannot replace that mystical connection that leaps between people in a live performance. And so I had decided very consciously with Black Pearl to not do that. It to me, you know, Black Pearl, our musicians are African American, Latin, Asian, European. Um, uh, with all due respect, Mayan Chen, I'd say we're equally as diverse as Sinfonietta. I think we share, yeah, I think we share that title, and it's a title that I hope grows. I hope that that's not exclusive to just the two of us, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But for us, part of the magic in our performances is also the audience that we draw. They are part of the performance. And so for me, the locus of our art form isn't just the music that we produce, it is the sense of community that is engendered through the shared experience between the orchestra and our audience. And so that's why for us, I wanted the musicians to feel supported and creative during this time where they could do their own individual projects as sponsored by Black Pearl. But we were not going to bring people together until we could really bring people together safely.
Mayanne, making the return, what is something that maybe people haven't considered?
Well, I think since I am beginning this process in Taiwan, both with the National Taiwan Symphony Orchestras, that's professional musicians, but also with the International Youth Orchestra that was part of the Summer Festival. I think it's interesting how this new normal has been. I don't know about my colleagues, but literally at the beginning of my rehearsal process, I had a mask and a face shield because I'm coming from America, and then there's a fairly lengthy quarantine period. But you know, they said 14 days, but literally it's really 22 days that the health minister in Taiwan has to track you. And so I was trying to protect everybody, but it's not the easiest way to rehearse when you're looking like an alien. And I realized quickly I can't even hold a baton because I have to have a microphone in order to speak for 80, 90 people to hear me on stage through the mask, through the face shield. I have to use a microphone all the time. And so I can't really be holding a baton, turning pages, holding a microphone. It was just a lot more logistics than I realized before going in. But it's all worth it in terms of, being able. Yes, it's not the most comfortable thing. I mean, even all the performers wear masks on stage other than winds and breaths. But for example, they also have to deal with the new reality of it's not just sound shield, but it's actually protecting shield between the wind players, which actually confine them into a space where they can't hear each other like normal. So there's a lot more than people realize, but all for the sake of being able to do what we love. It was totally worth it.
Now, that great restart is going to be an exciting feeling. I think lots of us would be happy to deal with some plexiglass if it meant we could play together. But orchestral music has its own set of areas where progress is really wanted right now by the communities they serve. Representation is a key piece of that puzzle. It's 2020, 5%-ish of conductors of orchestras worldwide are women. What do you think could right that ship? Jerry, I want to start with you because starting your own group has got to be the most bold step someone could take.
It is pretty bold, and certainly not for the faint of heart. I mean, I think back to when I started Black Pearl at another major like world crisis in 2008. I feel like chaos is our brand almost. Like we just are kind of going from these interesting times in the world. But these moments of crisis are also moments of opportunities for really systemic change. And so when I started Black Pearl 10 years ago, that was a moment for systemic change. I think we're at a time now in the United States, certainly politically, with the nomination of the first African American woman to be a vice presidential running mate is significant. Back when I started Black Pearl, there was the candidacy of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And so again, Black Pearl has been living through these interesting political times. And so I think that if orchestras can start with diversity as a fact of the world and not as this hoped for, wished for state, that will give them, I think, a new set of perspectives and questions to ask about how to engage in their communities moving forward during these times.
Joanne, coming from starting with the Women's Philharmonic into now, still at 5%, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I was thinking that we're finally starting to see more women conductors. That's happening. I mean, very slowly and very late, I think, but we are starting to see that. But women composers are still really underrepresented on the concert stage, especially with orchestras. And you mentioned the Women's Philharmonic. I mean, our goal in the 80s and 90s was to actually become redundant, to not be necessary. And we thought that was achievable, that with all the pieces we did, we played music only by women, we recorded music by women, and we were just trying to represent it to everyone we could talk to about music by women. And we thought that organically that music would go into the regular mainstream of performances, and it didn't. And I just want to make a strong case again for women composers, past and present, and there are so many present ones that are writing great music. It's very important that they just, as Jerry said, they're just part of the reality. They're not what we're hoping for. I love when you said that, Jerry, that they are just part of our life now. We're not waiting, we're doing it.
Mayanne?
Well, I totally agree with what Jerry and Joanne has shared. And I think I'm sad to see that a lot of what's in place to champion for women composers have been sort of put on hold due to the COVID. So here's an example. I was going to make a debut with New York Phil on a young people's concert that is completely 100% just women composers, and I think that's been canceled. And I don't know that next year, even though they've given me another program, that it's not the same program. So it's so sad to see that focus being sort of shifted, because orchestras has to plan so ahead, and sometimes they can't replace the plan so quickly. And that's not the only example. I've seen a lot of my guest engagements upcoming in Europe, the due to the fact that they have to have shorter program to avoid intermission, that the natural thing is to keep the mainstream repertoire and letting go of the women composers or the new music pieces on the program. So that makes me very sad, because it might take us a while as an industry to come back to what I have seen, the New York Phil doing the Project 19 women composers mission, but a lot of them has been canceled. And I'm hoping that they will find a way to fulfill the commissioning. But in the meantime, I think that's going to be a lot of orchestras' tendency in terms of keeping the mainstream repertoire and taking care of the new music or the women music later.
As far as representation goes, and the same thing has happened in Nashville, our symphony was meant to start the season with a commission in honor of the centennial of the 19th Amendment tomorrow, and it's pushed forward. So always looking forward to hearing music by Julia Wolf. But as far as representation goes, gender isn't the only major consideration. The repertoire and the orchestras themselves are overwhelmingly white. What do we lose when we lose a diversity of background or lack a diversity of background? And again, what could we do? There's some concrete steps that have been floated lately, like eliminating blind auditions. Could that fix it? Or any number of things, but what would you like to see happen? Joanne.
Well, to me, diversity is what's going to keep our orchestras relevant and alive. I mean, it's not an option. That has to happen. And just as we need conversation of different pieces on a program, we need conversation of different individuals. Um, the solution to that actually has to start much further up the stream. I mean, everything together, but we have to start with giving people of color, children of color, diverse backgrounds, when they are very young, the chance to be exposed to music, to play music, to be helped, to go to summer festivals, to get a great teacher, to get a good instrument. We have to do that because that's the natural progress of entering an orchestra. Most people in an orchestra, if you ask them when they started, will tell you somewhere around 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, and they had support all the way through. We have to make that happen. So we can't expect it to happen now when we've been ignoring where we really need to help. So I'm a big fan of the entire process that we have to help throughout, and it's going to happen naturally and organically. Um, because the issue of the screen coming down is one that is very sensitive for musicians, for the reason of fairness. They feel, and I understand this, that they make a judgment not knowing a person, not because they're a friend or not a friend. They just listen. And the person behind the screen also feels protected too, Colleen. I think this is important. If you're a person who plays often as a sub with the orchestra, and you happen to have a bad day on audition day, you're protected from them making any judgments. So we haven't found a way to come up with a different plan, but certainly we have to invest much more of our money and our efforts with young people.
Jerry, what do you think of the screen? And do you think it's an important part of the conversation, or is it a sort of a red herring that it's only a very small piece of the puzzle?
Well, I think the screen should stay up, but it should be an honest screen. I think we all, let's just be honest, there's ways to get around the screen. It's not foolproof. Um, there are ways to get around the screen. And I think if you look at one of the larger professional orchestras, the most diverse one, the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, which is the truly most diverse, that's a screened audition, but it is a truly screened one. And so people are truly listening, and it's no surprise then that it is incredibly diverse amongst the top tier professional level orchestras. And so I don't know that taking the screen down will fix it. It certainly won't fix it for conductors. We have to, they have to be able to see us in order for us to do our job. So I don't know that would help for conductors. But I agree with Joanne. I think, investing in children is always the important way to go. But I think investing in children doesn't also address the fact that they then drop out later because they don't see any representation in the orchestra. They don't see this as a viable career path. They don't see anyone who looks like them in the concert hall in any appreciable numbers. That makes it, this kind of notion that, this exceptionality that there's only one in an orchestra or at most two. And so they don't see the kind of numbers that communicate to them that this is a welcoming industry, that this is something that is a viable career option for them. And so I think that there's a lot of self-deception that goes on in the hiring process of classical music that makes a lot of externalities that the answer to these things, when really the answer to diversity is people. It's a people problem. It's not a system problem. It's not a music problem. It's a people problem. And until people are willing to address the biases that we carry within ourselves, the unwillingness to change, that these problems will persist no matter how much money we throw at them.
Mayanne, from the perspective of the Chicago Sinfonietta, what strategies did the orchestra use to develop such a diverse crew?
Well, maybe I'll just add on to what Jerry and Joanne has shared, and I totally agree that it's We have to go. We have to invest in the youth, and I would just add that it's overall it's a systematic change that we need to see it happen. So here's what the Chicago Sinfonietta has done, because even if a person of color could go through music training, that there is a big gap between having a music degree and able to land a professional job. So whether screen or not, I think the biggest issue we have tried to address is providing them with side-by-side opportunities, getting real important instructions from very experienced people like in Chicago Symphony or other major orchestras to really help them understand, okay, you have come this far, but what does it take for you to break into that world where their representation of the population is very small. So we have seen quite a success rate with our project inclusion program, which happened to be which has produced the largest fellows so far. In terms of fellows of color. We have instrumentalists, we have conductors, we have started also administrators. And so on the conductors front, that's the most successful just because what Jerry has said, with conductors, it's interesting. You can't put up a screen. So it's really about personal relationship, how you do on the podium. We have launched close to 10 people into professional positions. We're talking about staff, conductors around the country. And that has been amazing for us to see, okay, if we give them the right tool and really take them one by one in terms of what each one needs to get there, that we have a big success rate. So I think it's various level that needs multiple system in place to really address the bigger issue.
There are very loud and needed voices in the representation conversation and the journey of diversity in classical music. What is something you feel like has not been considered yet? Is there a piece of the puzzle that seems glaring to you but hasn't reached the zeitgeist? And what needs to happen around it? And I'll throw in a piece of the puzzle that I hadn't mentioned yet when I set up these interview questions, which is disabilities and accessibility. Jerry.
Sure. Something that I mean, so the first thing that I want to say, I also, do some consulting around this, is that diversity is not a single catch-all phrase. It is something that every organization has to define for itself in relationship to the community that it seeks to serve. And so I think starting with that is very important. I'm sorry, I should have said we're based in Philadelphia, and so I'm very blessed to have musicians from Curtis, from Juilliard, from Peabody. We're just in kind of a sweet spot in terms of some of the best musicians in the country, indeed the world, are right here in our backyard. And so we're really blessed to have that incredibly high level of artistry and musicianship in our diverse musicians. But we are also very blessed to have a number of organizations that we've worked with in the past around, to your point, additional forms of accessibility in terms of different intellectual abilities, hearing disabled, those kinds of things, and making sure that those experiences can be enjoyed to the fullest in a variety of ways. And so again, how you define diversity depends on your audience, depends on the communities that you're seeking to serve. And I think in answering the question of what diversity means to your particular orchestra, that becomes a way for you to develop a more authentic relationship, I think, with that community, because it brings them into the process.
Mayan.
It's actually a very interesting topic for orchestra to explore. How do we include people of disabilities into our concert hall and even on stage? So, for example, River Oaks Chamber Orchestra, with which I serve as the first artistic partner, they provide Braille for people in terms of program notes, and I thought that's pretty neat in terms of you know, uh, just one more step of including, making people feeling more included. At the Chicago Sinfonietta, I'm disclosing sort of a wish list. We have always wanted to do a synesthesia kind of concert. It's about senses. But with the COVID, it was really hard to pull it off right now. But it would be lovely for us to really tap into, you know, different senses and to really help people with, very um, uh, aspect to really experience music in a different way, whether it's wearing a vest that can feel the vibration or smelling scents in a concert hall, having colors. There are just so many possibilities, but with very limited budget, we haven't come up with the solution yet. But maybe my colleagues here, we can put our heads together. Maybe we'll come up with something for the future.
Joanne?
Well, I mean, these are all very interesting topics, and we don't have a solution for everything. But I think what we do know is where we can make the most impact, like right now, and that is playing pieces by people of color and by women, and playing them really well, making them a natural part of our new canon, our sort of new canon, and keep doing that. And what we've been doing in Buffalo, of course, and this has been a great thing for us, is we are constantly inviting guest artists who come from diverse backgrounds, guest conductors, and do that with joy, which we do because our community is so diverse, um, and to do it at the very best level possible, because that's really going to get integration in a way that is real and lasting.
I had a question actually come in from our audience, which is great. Asking about working with your board in this case, because everybody in nonprofits, we work with our board. It says, until our boards of directors are diverse and truly reflect our cities, these other changes will face some strong headwinds. How do you, working with your board specifically, work toward diversification? Let's go right back to Joanne.
Well, we work very hard on that. In fact, we established a diversity committee on the board of people from those diverse communities, not from our board members, and put them on the board. And I must say, though, that committee, especially in these troubled times that we've had, has been an anchor for us. They've helped us get through it. They've told us how to make change happen. We just came off of three um, big town halls that we did, one for the orchestra, one for the board, and one for the staff, addressing racism in American orchestras and in our particular situation. And that was very telling. So this diversity committee that we formed with the help of the mayor has been phenomenal. And it's helped us look at some very difficult and maybe not completely solvable problems, but with honesty and with the feeling that we will make this change happen.
That's interesting to hear that you had civic involvement with the mayor.
Yes.
Mayanne, what has that been like for you with your board?
I've sort of taken for granted that the board of the Chicago Sinfonietta has always been one of the most diverse in the city, and so and just so the audience who are listening know, the Chicago Sinfonietta, the Chicago Sinfonietta was founded based on diversity and inclusion. So it wasn't necessary because of Beethoven and Mozart that we exist. It was purely based on diversity and inclusion. So everything we do came from that angle. And so like I said, I think we've practiced it to really use that to filter through everything we do, even though we've recently discovered through a grant from League of American Orchestras that we are all taking a racism sort of workshop to realize, wow, even what we thought as one of the most diverse orchestra in America, that there's certain practice that it was just, unconscious bias that taps into racism at all sorts of level. And so we are working our way to really work closely together with our board members, with our Southside friends, which is predominantly African Americans. There's always more that we can do, no matter what level we think our commitment have been. So that's been a big lesson for me personally. I think you're
I
muted.
muted myself as I asked Jerry.
I began to panic because I was like, oh no, is it my internet connection? I'm sorry, the question again was about boards and working with your
Specifically
board.
working with your board. I know it sounds like the person asking the question was foreseeing a conflict with the board, asking about moving forward in a more diverse way and suggestions for working with that.
Sure, sure. Well, again, like the Sinfonietta, and I have to say, I knew Maestro Paul Freeman, the founder of Sinfonietta, personally. He was someone I looked up to as a young conductor. So I have so much respect for that organization. But again, when I founded it in 2008, the circumstances under which I founded it were fairly unique. Going back to your earlier question about the screen and conductors and auditioning. I was a music director finalist at an orchestra in California, and one of 3 people, and did not get the job. And this happened a few times, and it happens. You're applying for a job; it's not unusual. And so the search committee chair at the one orchestra said, after I asked, some questions about, what did I do wrong or what could I have done better? He says, it was very complimentary, but he said at first that the orchestra didn't know how to market me. And then when I asked for more clarity, because I didn't really understand his answer, he says, you don't look like what our audience expects the conductor to look like. And so that experience pretty much made me understand what I hadn't understood. I had assumed that through experience and through talent and through hard work that I was a classical music insider. I deserved to be. I had all these great jobs and had all these wonderful experiences. But what that taught me was that there were perceptions about what classical music is and who deserves to perform this music that were very kind of hardwired into the art form. And so there was going to have to be some, to all the points that my colleagues and I have been making, not just here in this wonderful interview, but through the work that we've been doing in our own individual ensembles, that this has to be systemic within the organization as well as across the industry. And so the board of Black Pearl, everything about Black Pearl was established to change those perceptions, not just about who can be a conductor, but about who this music is for, who it is about, why it exists, why it still matters. And so that was an organizational foundational principle for us, the diversity, just like Mayan talked about it in Sinfonietta. This wasn't something we had to think about as a problem to solve. It was built into the DNA of the organization. And so I think to have a board who agrees with that philosophically, it eliminates a lot of that. But also people need to understand that people are on boards of orchestras for a variety of reasons. And it isn't always just because they love classical music. Many times boards of orchestras, the orchestras themselves are major cultural institutions that carry a lot of prestige. And so a lot of people are on these boards for the social cachet that it brings them, for the ability to network with other business people and do business together. And so boards of orchestras serve a variety of functions that go beyond just serving the music.
Some of the questions that came in advance were related to support of new music, something all 3 of us, all 3 of you are very experienced with. And I was actually wondering specifically how that has changed throughout your time working as a conductor, throughout your career. How has the experience evolved within new music? Mayan?
I think it hasn't changed too much for me in terms of being a young conductor. You have to look for opportunities to conduct. And so when composers ask me to conduct their pieces, I will always say yes, regardless of how good the piece was. And so it has changed in terms of not, I can't say yes to every composer that approach me. Our seasons are too small to accommodate all the requests I've gotten. But I think my colleagues will agree. We're constantly listening for new pieces. During this COVID time, I find myself just exploring names after names that I didn't have time because there are just so many creative minds out there. And for me to really understand a person's style, I have to listen to more than just one piece. Usually I try to listen to a whole bunch. And that takes time, and you got to know a person's style doesn't mean you can program that person's music easily because sometimes as a guest conductor I can make recommendation unless it's a group that I know so well or a group that I have a title with. I have less say, in terms of being a guest conductor. I can make suggestions, but oftentimes, the orchestras might have their own wish of who they want to program. And so this I find new music is sort of a never ending hole for me because there's always more people's music I didn't know, and I wish I could program more. But I think with the programs I have had, I try to at least program something on every concert if I can, whether it's a repeating composer, a composition I've done on recordings, but it helps to at least get something out there every time I do a regular program with an orchestra.
Joanne, I'm specifically curious about the two-pronged approach to hear from you about commissioning versus programming in new music, because it's really two different processes, but pieces should get played more than once if they can.
Right.
So what are some of your approaches with that?
Well, first of all, just in general, I feel that new music is in a much better place now than it has ever been before. I think audiences are more diverse, audiences are much more open. Musicians can play anything. Our musicians and orchestras today, they're at the top of their game and they're hungry for that. They're interested in that. And frankly, the music of the late 20th century and 21st century that's being written in this country is fantastic. So I think it's a very positive situation. And for me, the idea of a commission is not so important. In fact, people think it's strange that I say this. I'd much rather do the third performance because the first performance, the composer is with you, and that's wonderful. But there are always changes that she or he wants to make, and that's partly why you play this music, so you can have it have a sort of gestation period. So if you're playing the second or the third, ideally the third performance of a piece, um, the piece already has settled. It already has a relationship with musicians because it's had other performances, and it's ready to be played. And for our audiences, it's new. It doesn't matter if it was played in New York City or California; it's new to them. But I think that's why I always look for second and third performances. Or if I'm in a consortium, I ask not to be the leading person because I want to hear it in the way that it's really going to be. And I think the only roadblock to performing new music is something that we as conductors have to be aware of, because I love it and I do a lot of it. We have to allow enough rehearsal time. We have to be sensitive to not throwing it on a program and shortchanging it or thinking that's going to be easy to put together when it deserves so much more time than that. Consider the rest of the program so that you can, the most important piece on that program is the piece that's new to the orchestra, and you can take the time that you need to really live with it.
Jerry?
I could not agree more. And, for me, I think I have a different take on new music. When I was starting out in conducting, I was in Chicago. And, Chicago and Buffalo, I think are new music towns. They have audiences that embrace it. But I think we all know that there are major classical music markets, Boston in particular, Philadelphia is another one, where when I came to Philadelphia, they were going to be celebrating 20th century music and doing a whole season of nothing but 20th century repertoire. and the whole town basically just gave back their tickets because they said, we don't want to hear, I mean, forgetting that Debussy, that Mahler, like all Copeland, like all these things. But if you just said 20th century, people just had a whole perception around it. And so that was just very interesting to me coming from Chicago, which was just really embraces new music. And I love doing premieres and those kinds of things. And so it is, to Joanne's point, it is so important that conductors and orchestras take the time to learn and fall in love with these pieces, because if we as musicians and artists love and cherish these pieces, that will communicate itself to the audience. So I agree completely with Joanne.
Community engagement feels almost like a buzzword right now. It's interesting to me when conducting such a travel heavy career. Mayanne said, staying in place for 2 weeks was a luxury. To consider that a conductor really is a community leader. Um, what steps do you personally take to fulfill that role? Uh, let's start with Mayanne.
Well, I think through this pandemic, I think we have learned that people can connect in so many ways. Virtually, basically, is it really cross cultural, time zone, anything. And so I think what I have learned is that yes, my engagements might be months away, but there's ways that you can still connect with that community through, especially now through virtually. And so, obviously, being a conductor, you have to. It's like chamber music with the orchestras you're working with. You can't be too demanding as a guest, but at the same time, if they ask me to be helpful in terms of any community engagement, I always say yes. Anything that could help promote the orchestra, to promote the art form, that's a no-brainer. And so I would say it depends on the orchestra. I can try to be helpful in terms of if there are particular programs. For example, Project W features many women composers, and one particular, the first African American woman composer in America, whose work being premiered by a major orchestra. We're talking about Florence Beatrice Price. And, I think I would recommend to the orchestras, well, to really introduce the audience through some of her works to get familiar with, because I think when people don't know, there's this, and with Jerry's example, when you give them some scary, what they think is scary 20th century, they just don't have anything to hold on to, then they start to panic. So I think the familiarity is very important to help create that safety net. And so when I brought Florence Price to my debut with BBC London and also Austrian orchestras, they actually, the orchestra love it. I mean, for them, they could hear Joplin, they could hear Sinatra even. I mean, they have all kinds of different imaginations when you're able to give them rooms to do that. And so I think it's important that we do what we can to help, create stories about the composers we're doing, and to help the audience understand, a little bit more the music they will be hearing.
Jerry, conductor as community leader.
Sure. I think, it's interesting. I think that used to be the case before, that kind of jet set maestro kind of era set in, and that, man is, really living that life. I mean, she's all over, and she's got all these great things. And I think for people who can spend time more within a community, that role is based upon, I think, the orchestra itself, and the fact that it has been a major kind of central focus of community life in that way. For me with Black Pearl, because we're only 10 years old technically, and so that notion of being a community leader has been very different in terms of how we have reinterpreted what an orchestra is for a community, and how we operate within the community. For us, Black Pearl has been about transforming the orchestra from from being a gatekeeper of an artistic product, and that by, we don't own Beethoven, we don't own Mozart. What we do is our programs are about facilitating the creative process for Philadelphia. And so that is how I have interpreted being a community leader, kind of democratizing creativity in a way that brings people into the orchestra and opens up the door in ways that makes it a more reciprocal relationship. And then just me personally, I serve on other boards. I was on a hospital board for a while. I was on the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance. I'm on the board of other community organizations as well. And so by that, kind of making sure that the conductor can be someone who's not just an ambassador for the organization, but for the art form, and also get ideas and bring those from the other communities other community members that they work with back to the orchestra itself.
Joanne, you're back just in
I'm
time.
back.
Conductor as community leader.
Well, I believe very strongly as a music director. Okay, let me say this, music director. If you're a music director of an orchestra, for me, you need to live in that city. You need to be part of that city. And because that orchestra is really relevant to that region and that city. It's not trying to copy something like the Chicago Symphony or like the Philadelphia Orchestra or the New York Philharmonic. It's relevant to where you are. And I found that the music director needs to be totally involved in that city. And the wonderful result of that is that you actually have a relationship with your orchestra, with people, with community members who can come up and talk to you about what you played last weekend, or make suggestions. And there's nothing to replace that. And I'm glad that I know many people do that. I'm sure that was Jerry was talking a little bit about that. I heard the end of it, but it makes a big difference.
Having a symphony orchestra in your city is a sign of the success of that city's cultural scene. But these are big organizations. They cost a lot of money and use a lot of resources. How do you think orchestras can make themselves good stewards of their local arts economies? Let's start with Jerry.
That is a huge loaded question, to be quite honest. I mean, I think, I live in a city where the orchestra, the main orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra is over 100 years old. And so you have to think about when that was found. You have to put it in the historical context. These were European institutions. And the strategy upon which they were engaging the community was one of a social good in terms of bringing music to less economically advantaged people, to ensure that classical music could be brought to them. And so they're essentially large 19th century social charities. That's the business model that they are. And so there's a lot to talk about in terms of how do orchestras that have this 19th century model instilled in them and bring that into the 21st century. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I think to ensure that large institutions such as that, or even Black Pearl, which is a much smaller and younger organization, I think one of the things we have to do is first of all, be good stewards of the financial investment that communities make in us. I don't think it's morally right to take tax dollars from people of different colors and yet not serve all of those people. It doesn't make any sense to me, whether it's federal dollars, whether it's state dollars, whether it's local dollars. You need to do a very, very, very good job of making sure that everyone whose tax paying income generates your grant dollars, that you're serving that community. But kind of what I answered before is what is the nature of the orchestra? And as I said, we need to work industry wide from functioning as gatekeepers to being facilitators for the community. And those are questions about how orchestras do that. Those are questions that every orchestra needs to answer for itself, because to Joanne's point, that orchestra serves that community, and it is a relationship, and how they move together forward to solving those questions, which are very important, needs to be something that community and that orchestra works on together in a partnership, like Joanne said.
Joanne, cultural ecosystem.
Well, you know, I think about it, I think in the opposite way, Colleen, and I should say that I'm thinking about mid-sized orchestras where I've worked with like Buffalo and Virginia, and that the orchestra is a tremendous resource that brings so much more to the community. uh, I mean, many times fold what they get in support, because the orchestra actually becomes the musical mosaic in that region, in that city, and in that region. It helps music flourish all over the region. First of all, youth concerts, and I'm sure that this is true for both of my friends. We give youth concerts to thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of young people who come from public schools. Every year they come to the orchestra every single year of their education, through middle school, through high school. But our musicians then become the teachers in private situation, in colleges, in high schools. They play chamber music in churches and temples and halls all over. Many of our musicians volunteer in hospitals and in homes, or not right now in these situations, but will again, with music therapy. And we're playing for opera, we're playing for ballet, we're playing for music festivals. Frankly, I think that those 75 musicians, 80 musicians give back so much to their community that it's astonishing what a resource it is and how it affects everyone's life.
Man.
I totally echo what Jerry and Joan has said, and I'll just add that sometimes smaller orchestra like mine, the Chicago Sinfonietta, performs at the home of the Chicago Symphony. We perform in their home, and we have to find a way to be different. And at the same time, we're a little bit more nimble just because we're smaller, and the musicians and the board really come from a place of embracing innovations. And so I would just add on to, and I'm sure my colleagues ensemble have done the same thing. We have collaborated probably more arts group than most orchestras in town. So anything you can think of, we probably have done, ranging from flamenco dance, marching band that actually gotten us the MacArthur Genius Grant because nobody believed that it could be possible. And we have done with Chinese painters creating artwork right during the performance. Russian um, uh, kids circuit group, um, hip hop dance group. I mean, anything you can think of, we probably have done. And so I think, in a way, that it was wonderful for us to give all this platform, Chicago Young Authors, for example, being our MC for our annual Dr. King tribute program, where a couple years ago they wrote very powerful poems in between pieces where we as a staff had to decide, do we pull the plug or not, because people might be running out the exit. We decided it's the voice of our day, we should allow it to be. And you can hear the audience gasp during the concert when, the raw emotions of these teenagers were really expressing the feeling of the time. And so I think it's our job to turn our concert hall into reflecting our community. I mean, yes, we have great repertoire to represent, but at the same time, we represent our times as well. And so I'm proud to say that the symphonic art form could also be a platform to showcase our arts community.
I have two audience questions and then one wrap-up question. So I'm sorry, we're going a little bit over. Hopefully that's okay. The first was about audience diversity and programs that you would suggest to make concert tickets more accessible to families or individuals. So we talked about cultural diversity, we talked about gender diversity. This is a question about economic diversity and the affordability of attending an orchestral concert. So I'm going to leave this one as a toss-up to the group, actually. Any suggestions for affordability of tickets?
Well, I will say in Buffalo, we probably have the lowest price tickets of any orchestra of our size because we want people to come. And that is a big problem. And we offer a lot of free concerts as well. We like to think that any person in our city or in our county that wants to come to the Buffalo Philharmonic can come, even if it's a comp ticket that we give. So I don't think that that's been an issue with us because the prices are low, and they're low for that reason, that we want everyone in our region to be able to take advantage of it.
I had a question come in from a student harpist named Victoria, and I'm giving her name because I feel like you actually may want to address her directly with this question. She is studying harp in school, looking forward to an orchestral career, and is hearing the advice that the pandemic is crushing this. Find something else to do. What do you want to say to Victoria? Let's start with Jerry.
Excuse me, I would say, Victoria, congratulations on your studies. The harp is a beautiful instrument. I would say keep your options open. And my answer is not in relationship to, the pandemic crushing orchestras. I just think, young musicians need to keep their options open, especially in terms of, if you look at a lot of conservatories these days, a lot of them are teaching business skills and entrepreneurship skills. And so when I say to keep your options open, that doesn't mean to close the option of playing the harp. That means expand your perceptions or conception about what you can do with that harp.
Mayan.
I will echo that. I just had a wonderful harp student in the program in Taiwan, who's a wonderful artist, a visual artist, and she actually told me that she befriended many people in her generation, but she's about to go to college now. That they developed this multiple interest, not because of the time, just because the population in Taiwan are shrinking, and so a lot of parents are able to really put their kids through many different things. And so I would suggest, the most successful musicians that we see nowadays, using my violinist, who was a wonderful actor in town, who turned to be the best editor on video, as an example. He's probably making more money doing video editing right now than performing. Not to say that he doesn't love playing the violin, but you have to sort of find the balance in life. And if you have other interests, and echoing Jerry's entrepreneur spirit, keep your options open and really develop. I think it will enhance your musicianship. This young artist who just drew wonderful pictures, his her harp playing has just, in 3 years I've seen, just jumped through the roof. So I think it worked with each other. So go and find other things that will make your harp playing even better.
Joanne.
I totally agree with both Jerry and Mayan. I just want to add that I find that to Victoria, don't stop practicing and playing, and go for it. Go for every harp audition there is. But I find that the happiest musicians are the ones who live the most diverse musical lives, that it's not every day coming to an orchestra rehearsal. It may be chamber music, it may be teaching, it may be music therapy, and playing in an orchestra. So many of those people are much happier than people in the largest orchestras.
One final wrap-up question here. It's pretty broad, but also succinct. If you could snap your fingers and make one change about orchestras as a whole, worldwide, what would you adjust or fix or add or change? Let's start with Mayan.
No, that's a very hard question. This is personal for me, so I'm just going to answer it this way. I've lost colleagues, dear colleagues, through COVID. If I could snap my finger and have them come back to life, that's one thing I would wish for. It just, we lost so many of them too soon, and so yeah, that's my only wish. Is I wish that we didn't lose that many people.
Joanne.
Well, my wish would be that orchestras could be could be acknowledged as one of the most important parts of life by the communities they live in and by the governments that they have, so that much more support could come to them. I think if orchestras could get a much greater support from governments, and that's not showing any less love for our companies and our individuals who keep us alive. They are our partners. They're our family. But if governments could support us much more heavily, then we could offer free concerts or very low price concerts. Then we could take risks. Then we could experiment. Then we could be diverse. And that would really change the world, I think.
Jerry?
First of all, I just want to say to Man, I'm so sorry to learn of the loss of your colleagues. I feel for you tremendously. I don't think anyone is sadly going to get through this not being touched in some way personally. Gosh, to be able to snap my fingers and transform orchestras. I think if I were going to snap my finger, I would want every orchestra in America to represent their communities in whatever way that means. That, again, diversity doesn't mean one thing, it's not a singular catchphrase. I would want each orchestra to represent the community that they serve authentically, because an orchestra is not just a musical ensemble, it's a worldview. When you see a group of musicians performing together, making music, that to me is a metaphor for the world, the ability of different people to come together in a singular reason and make music together. It's a symbol of the world for me. And so, to Joanne's point, I would want our country to recognize the precious jewel that every orchestra can be to its community, fund it appropriately, and allow us to truly be the leaders that we have been and can continue to be once this pandemic is over.
Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time. Audience, thank you for tuning in. I want to remind you that if you go to 91classical.org or your favorite podcasting app, you can find episodes of our Classically Speaking podcast, including a new release today featuring composer Jennifer Higdon and her low brass concerto recently recorded by the Nashville Symphony. Thanks for tuning in.